Hi, Noir family. Welcome to another edition of In Depth with Noir, the series where we sit down with bold, visionary creatives reshaping how African stories are told, seen, and remembered. I'm your host, Isha, and today's guest is someone whose name is echoing across global film circles, and for good reason. She's a producer, a lawyer by training, a cultural strategist by nature, and a voice leading a new vanguard of African cinema. From courtroom corridors to Cannes red carpets, her journey is one of passion, precision, and purpose. We're honored to have her with us today. Hi, Fumbi.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here. That was a
Thank
great intro. I was like,
you.
that's
Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such a pleasure to have this
thank you for
conversation.
having me. And well done on all the work that you're doing. I think it's so phenomenal what you're doing. So yeah, well done.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, or maybe even before the beginning. You're many things. You're a lawyer by training, a producer by passion, a cultural architect in many ways. When somebody asks, who is Fumbi, how do you choose to introduce yourself?
It's a really good question. I think if I'm honest, it's taken me a really long time to really understand the faceted ways that I exist and I want to sort of make impact in the creative ecosystem as a whole. I remember like before I started calling myself a producer, I mean, a producer is such a weighty title and I wanted to make sure that like I had gone through the ranks and grown through the ranks as well. So it took me some time before I finally said, okay, yes, now I can call myself a producer. And then also similarly as well, like with running Fatherland and like being the CEO and like working with my partner and being a co-founder as well of the business, again, I had to sort of like, I knew when that shift happened for me where I started to not just think about myself through the lens of the projects that I was taking on, but I started thinking about the entire like business aspect of production and like running a production company. I also started thinking about the industry as a whole. I remember that shift. So I think if someone were to ask me like who I am and like what how I would introduce myself right now, I would say that I'm a creative industrialist because at the heart of what I'm doing is I'm very passionate about people. I'm very passionate about stories and stories from the continent. And I'm also very passionate about systems as well. So that's kind of maybe the word that I would use to introduce myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. And can you talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say you're passionate about systems? Like, how does that flow into the work that you're doing?
I think, setting up a project or like being on a production and being a producer, what you're really doing is architecting both the creative elements of the story, but you're also architecting the systems that those creative elements need to sit on and rest on for it to be functional. Now, when you're shooting on the continent, and especially if you're shooting in Nigeria, in a lot of instances, depending on the scale of the project, you're building those systems from the ground up because they don't really exist. So when I talk about being passionate about the systems, for me, it's being passionate about the process through which certain things are done. So taking something from start to finish, having process that can sometimes feel a bit boring, but necessary. It involves the admin, the legal, the finance aspect of making a picture and shooting across Nigeria and across like the continent as well. And I'm so passionate about it because I truly, truly know that, especially in an ecosystem like ours, where yes, we are. Nollywood is a big industry in terms of like quantity, but in terms of infrastructure, it's still a very young and growing one. And I know that for us to sort of like leapfrog, we have to take systems seriously. We can't just continue to do things anyhow. So we have to have like processes in place and templates that we create from the projects that we create that allow for us to duplicate and replicate systems, so that it becomes soon enough, it becomes a standard procedure of doing things. And so when people are working on a project, they understand that this is the standard to adhere to. And that communication of it being the standard would automatically translate into the excellence that is then created. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think that's also what comes with being a trailblazer and being one of the first to really do something so wholeheartedly and so intentionally, you are paving the way for other people. And I think there's a sense of responsibility that comes with that as well to do things correctly. Whoever comes after you can have an easier path than you did. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful and you're so multifaceted. And I love the intentionality that you put behind everything.
Thank you. Thanks so
Yeah.
much. Thank you.
So before Fatherland, before Ken, who were you creatively? And what do you feel like shaped your voice as a storyteller?
I love this question. Creatively, I would say that I was before Fatherland and before Cannes. I've always been very intentional about aligning myself with the kind of work that I wanted to put out. Because when I started in production about 9, 10 years ago, I started off as a production admin, and my first project was a Google project. And Google was shooting 16 different stories across 8 different African countries. My former boss at the time, Dan McCain, who gave me an opportunity randomly, literally was so random, and he just said, "Hey, would you like to be on the project?" And I was like, "What?" But I said yes, and in saying yes, I fell in love with the process of making something from nothing. I fell in love with the process of being part of something that was bigger than me, and I knew it was bigger than me. And I would say that, that's the thing that's guides me and always guided me before Fatherland and still guides me even now during Fatherland. It's why, before Fatherland creatively, I always aligned myself to people whose perspectives maybe were not as mainstream as you will consider, but they had something unique that they were trying to say. And I wanted to be in a position to help them say that unique thing. And it could be work that could be considered like independent, truly, in the fashion and the way that it's created. But the one thing that they were was just like artists. So one of the very first people that I worked with was my best friend. She's a filmmaker and a director. And, I remember she had this like web series that she had created that was across like Lagos and Kenya and Nairobi. And in season 2 of the web series, like I decided, what she said to me, "Oh, would you produce this?" And I was like, "Oh, of course." And so I then produced, that was when I started to call myself a producer, really. And again, like it was a series about like a young married couple in their 20s figuring out life and adulthood, and it was funny, it was quirky, it was new, it was old at the same time. And there was such, I'm not saying this because she's my best friend. I love her. But there was just such purity to how she was telling the story. And I think that's the one thing I would say that I've always just been intentional about, that I wanted to be the person who was working with like artists, like true artists, like people who were creating stuff and who may not necessarily be mainstream, but just so were doing things from a very unique, authentic place, and yeah, and I think it's still who I am. Is it? Yeah, for sure. It is, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And you're Nigerian. So
Yeah.
how do you feel like your Nigerian identity, has played a role in how you see stories, especially when we're talking about the global film landscape?
Yeah, really good question. Your questions are great. Wow. No, but honestly speaking, Aisha, like it's who I am. Like I grew up, I'll tell you a funny story. So when I grew up, right, I grew up watching, obviously, like most people probably did. I grew up watching lots of like American content, like so watching like American films and everything like that. And only when I went to uni in England did I maybe start watching a little more British stuff. But I grew up watching primarily like cable TV in Nigeria was like filled with like American content. And I remember that was my sort of window into culture and like pop culture, and it was really, really heavily like westernized. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what it was at the time, right? And I'm so proud now to say that, like, culturally, where we sit as Nigeria, but also where we sit generally as Africans, we contribute to the global dialogue of what culture is. It's in the hair, it's in the nails, it's in the music, it's in the Amapianos and the Afro beats, it's in the selling out the O2 concerts and selling out Madison Square Garden. Like it's we are such a force to be reckoned with now. But even before all of this happened, I said to myself that if I was able to, 16, 17, 14, if I was watching American content and I could understand it, then there was a place for us and our stories as well in that universal conversation. I very early on, I didn't believe the fact that what was best, or the only sort of like territories that could contribute globally to the conversation around film or around culture was in the West. I just didn't believe that. Like, it just felt like, are you kidding? Like, what happens to the rest of the world? So somehow, like internally, there was a resistance to just accepting that as the norm. And then obviously, like when you grow up in Nigeria, even if I schooled abroad and I came back home, I've had the privilege of being in like places, in two places, and growing up in two places, as it were. But the one thing that always stayed with me in my question of even who I was as a person and how I wanted to show up as a person was my Nigerianness. That was the thing that was permanent. I could not take it away. So I had to do a lot of work to even accept and know what accepting that meant for me, and then present it in the most authentic way to me, and not try to pander it to anyone else's taste or anything like that. Again, my proudest thing with My Father's Shadow, with our film, is the fact that even down to like the partnerships that we had with this, you have like global partners like the BBC, the BFI movie, Match Factory, who also understand that this is a cultural thing that is specific but universal at the same time. But I think it's, again, like I said, it's who I am, Aisha. Like, it's who we are. Like, I'm not. I don't know that there's any other perspective that I can share with the world other than this, like, because this is my lived experience. This is who I am as a person. And it is as valid as the American, as the British, as the Scandinavian. It is as valid as any other place in the world. So, yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit and go off script because I want to explore. So, you were in Nigeria, you schooled in uni, and then you came back to Nigeria. And I want to talk about that for a little bit because I think oftentimes you hear stories of people from back home who school in the US, and in London, in England, and they want to stay there. There's
Yeah.
opportunities there.
Yes.
So, what made you come back? And did you always know you wanted to come back, or was it the experience there that kind of shifted your perspective?
So, I mean, I studied law in England. The first reason that made me come back was my dad, actually. It was a very practical decision of like, okay, you finished your university now, come back home and qualify. Because if you study law and you have to like qualify as a lawyer, in England, you have to choose between being a barrister and a solicitor. It's like you have to choose which route you want to go after university. But in Nigeria, you get qualified as both once you go through law school. So from my practical perspective, for my dad, he was like, listen, come back home, qualify as both, and then you can go back to England and do like a conversion course or something. But I would say that, what made me stay back home, and I did try in 2021, I tried to move back to England and it didn't work out. And I came back home. And I would say honestly that what made me stay back home was a couple of reasons. Number one was community. I started to build a strong community here, just friends and people and family, and also like artists and creators that I was connecting with as well. The second thing was the freedom to discover. While I respect the systems that are created in the West, whether it's in England or it's in the US, Nigeria is, because it lacks that set infrastructure, as it were, it means that a lot of things are down to sheer will and determination. So it gives you freedom in a sense to dream. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen in other spaces. I can't speak to other spaces, but here I know that like you can dream, you can express and say, this is what I want to do, and this is who I want to be, and this is how I want to show up. And there are so many odds that are against you, trust me. But the one thing is that it somehow, it's like those odds never actually confine you if you really like understand what they really act as. They instead propel you, because you just can get up and decide, tomorrow I'm going to shoot this tomorrow and shoot it tomorrow. So I think that was something that I really started to discover like very early on. And then when I started off in production, I would say the third thing for me that made me stay back was when I started off in production. Again, that feeling of being part of something that was bigger than me, but the nature of the project was such that I was traveling across Africa. So I went to Senegal, I went to Ivory Coast, I went to Ghana, I traveled different parts of Nigeria. So the movement between spaces, languages, people, but also seeing how much of the same we are. I was fascinated by that. I was like, man, like, like we're literally the same, but we're so different as well. It's why I will see a Kenyan tomorrow, I'll see a South African tomorrow, I'll see a Zimbabwean tomorrow, and we will gravitate towards each other. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of unspoken as well. So I think, because I had the privilege of being a part of a project that took me to different parts of the continent and also the different parts of Nigeria, I was very fascinated by that, by what I was seeing about the people and the language and our stories. And more, it just seemed like there was a richness of content here that was untapped. And if I was going to situate myself for impact, then it had to be here. And so even when I decided, or I was trying to explore moving back to England in 2021, it was always going to be a very timed thing for me. I was going to be there for no more than 2 years and then come back as well, because I knew I needed to learn more. So yeah, I think for me it's that this is where impact is, and this is where you can really make a difference. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's also so important for people to see and go against the grain of this narrative that you have to be outside of Africa to make an impact. So I love that you said, the impact is here, the impact is home. And, Africa is huge and there's so many different cultures and people, and there's so many stories that are untold and untapped. So I really love that. And I love that you're setting that example that impact can be here, success can be here, and you don't have to go to the West to find it. Yeah.
No, you don't. And I mean, the people who, based on like conditions, I'm also very aware that like sometimes it's not quite simple or so simplistic, because there are people who, based on conditions and just like harsher climates, have had to like relocate. And there are just some people who, based on opportunity, have also like had to relocate and like have situated themselves like, in other countries. Like one of Aki, who directed My Father's Shadow, he's British Nigerian, so he lives in London, but is Nigeria, grew up in Nigeria up until he was about 10 or 11 or so, and then was, moved to England. And his brother Wale, who's also my partner as well in Fatherland, also lived in England for some time, actually moved to Amsterdam to get a corporate job, and then came back to Nigeria, quit that job, came back to Nigeria to start music, and now he's like a complete multi hyphenate. He's also the writer of the film. So I think we all have that shared experience of us being foundationally from Nigeria, but having lived abroad. Some of us have stayed abroad, but some of us have also situated ourselves. But the one thing that keeps us in common, and for me, it's really important to speak to the people who are in the diaspora, who are connected to home but live somewhere else and have life set up somewhere else. It's important for me to speak to them, because I think what I want the film to do and what Fatherland to do is to show them that it is possible for you to come back and create at home, and that you need to create at home. Your voice is needed at home, and this is where your stories are felt and seen and heard and matter, and there are teams of people who, yeah, are extremely passionate and willing and to give themselves to your story and to what you're creating. So yeah, I think I'm aware that it may not be so straightforward for some people, but I think there's definitely something to be said around, also letting those people who are in the diaspora know that, like, again, home is where impact is. Yeah.
I love that. Home is where impact is. I'm going to use that one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about this incredible moment you're living through right now, My Father's Shadow at Cannes. First of all, congratulations. It's
Thank
a
you.
huge accomplishment, and I hope you know how proud we are of you, and I hope you are
Thank you.
proud of yourself and your entire team. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How are you feeling right
I
now?
get I get asked this question all the time, and it's a mix between like excitement and also, as you said earlier, it's the weight of responsibility as well. We wouldn't be in the position that we are in without like our partners who believed in us and like supported us and like gave us an opportunity and give the story really an opportunity and have been extremely gracious and helpful. So with Element, with my other producer, Rachel, with BBC, with the BFI. And it's a moment for all of us. And it's unique, I guess, to us, like from Nigeria, because it's the first Nigerian story to be selected at the festival. And again, there's excitement. There's also the weight of responsibility as well, because this is the first feature film from Fatherland, So it's like, okay, guys, our next film has to be amazing. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be a banger. So yeah, so I think that's truly how I feel. It's excitement and at the same time responsibility. I've heard people say, oh, just live in the moment and be kind to yourself. I'm like, I am living in the moment, but the moment comes with both things. And I'm aware that both things are important, because I'm aware that there's filmmakers and there are people, storytellers, producers, writers, who don't have this opportunity every time. And there are people whose this story is going to, like, be a nod to say that it's possible, and they don't have to compromise on what it is that they're trying to tell. So yeah, I'm, but at the same time, I can sum it up and just say I'm really grateful. So I
Yeah.
feel I'm really
Yeah. I
grateful.
mean, I think what you said was perfect. There's always nuances, like there can be that excitement and that gratitude, and then also recognizing that almost feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, right? Like being in this space. And because Cannes for so long has been, for European and Western cinema. So what does it mean truly for you to enter that space with the Nigerian story told on your own terms? Like how, not just how does it feel, but what does it mean to you, and what do you hope other people gain from it as well?
I mean, I think when people watch the film, I really want to see how it resonates with a lot of people, both, Africans and like non-Africans, Europeans as well. I think it means many things, if I'm honest. The first thing for me is to the team who created this. Like, film is such a team sport, and the majority of the crew that worked on this, over 80% of them are Nigerian. And that was very deliberate and intentional for us. Like over 80% of the crew were Nigerian, or are Nigerian, and about 90% from Africa as a whole. So we had Kenyans there, we had South Africans there, we had Ghanaians there as well. Like, so I think for me, what it means is, so it's that thing I was talking about when I was saying, being passionate about people and systems. It's that for the people who made this from the continent and the people who made this from Nigeria, that this is a win for us, that we're able to sort of tell stories that are globally, production value wise, globally, like that globally resonates with the rest of the world, and I think the other level to that is to just say that, as you've mentioned, like, festivals can sometimes feel very exclusionary, like, because it's like an exclusive playing field. So to have Yoruba, Pidgin, street names that I know, places that I go to on a weekly basis, to have them seen and taken in, by a wide variety of audiences from all over the world who will also be able to relate to the story. It's like I feel privileged that we're able to contribute to the global conversation of what stories should look and feel like, and that we're doing it in a way that we are honoring our culture. We're honoring those who before us have made films, because we're not the first Africans, you know what I mean? Yeah, but those who before us have made films and have made it also uniquely as well. Like, I feel privileged that we're also in that same category of filmmakers as well. I think again, it just shows that, listen, like the time is now to just like continue creating at home and to continue telling our unique stories. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you. And for those that will be watching this that don't know what your film is about, can you give us a little teaser, a little understanding of where the idea of this film came from and what does it explore?
Okay, so I'll give a little, but not too much,
Yeah,
because
just
you
a
have
bit.
to watch the film. So it's really a middle class story. It's a story of a father, who is who goes on a journey with his two sons to Lagos, from outside of Lagos, he's trying to just make ends meet. He's trying to get his wages, and get his employer to pay him. And it's set against the backdrop of a June 1993 election crisis. We're familiar with like Nigeria's history. And, against that backdrop, he tries to make his way back home and is met with so many like resistance. And that's pretty much the story. It's a middle class like story that everyone I think would be able to like relate with.
Yeah, and where did it come from? Where did the inspiration for
Yeah.
this come from?
So it's slightly semi-autobiographical because my partners Wale and Aki, Wale who wrote the story and Aki who co-wrote and directed it, both of whom lost their father at a really young age. They're brothers, right? And so they lost their father really, really early. And, due to that loss, I think they always had a question in their hearts around who he was like and what he was like, and, wanted to understand, I guess, dig deeper into the emotion of what it would feel like to spend a day with him. And so the place that it comes from is both personal and at the same time, like, because it's taking that sort of deep loss and almost opening it up for the entire world to see your inner feelings and inner thoughts around fatherhood, around identity, around what it means to be a son, and around what it means to you also be a young country and a young nation and want hope and have hope taking away from you. So there's a lot of themes and questions that it explores, and yeah, that's where it came from.
That's so exciting. And you did mention something that I wanted to touch on briefly because I know there's also a political component to this film, which I think just wrapping that into this emotional storytelling is just perfect. Can you talk a little bit about how your team and yourself were able to tell the story using that backdrop, and how were you able to navigate like the creative decisions around, not too much, but exactly the right amount of information, or how did you use that in the film? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I think the very first thing was like when Wale wrote the story and set it against like 1993, like that sort of political context. I think Wale is a very intentional writer, and I think one of the things he has always said that he wanted to do with his stories is that he always wants to sort of pose questions to things. So while we depict the political backdrop, we sort of leave a lot of questions for people to ask and engage with. And that's one of the things that Wale is really brilliant at doing with subtlety and with emotion as well, but also with childlike like purity. Because the same way like a child will ask you 21 questions, the same way, this kind of does the same thing as well. And yeah, and I think, the decision around like the creative decision around what to leave, what to not leave, I think it was really it came down to a lot of practical elements around what was also available to us, because a lot of the history, as you may or may not know, has sometimes been eroded. So when Wale was writing, and Aki as well with him, we had to conduct a lot of interviews with people who were able to sort of situate the context and the place of what was actually going on at the time, who, the biggest political figure was at the time, what his legacy was at the time, why he was doing what he was doing. And then, from those interviews, you're able to then peel like the relevant bits that the story needs to be founded on, as it were, and that add a lot of like the right sort of like emotional tones to the story. And I think that that process is a really important process because it's the way that we archive like history. A lot of times like people think of archiving just in just pictures and in like articles, and that's a fantastic way of doing that. But it's also, I think what this film does, it's also showing you that film actually is a relevant, especially where Africa is concerned, it's a very relevant way of archiving moment of history and time. And it provokes dialogue and conversation that was relevant then and is relevant now. Yeah.
Okay. I could listen to you talk all day. I want to talk a little bit. So, a lot of our audience, whether in the diaspora or on the continent, are creatives. They're creatives, whether it's in film and music and design. And we come together to talk to creatives like you who are aspiring or inspiring, I should say. And I want to ask you some questions about how you feel being in this space as a CEO as a producer, how do you balance your vision with execution? And I love that you talked a little bit about being able to dream, but I also feel like there's a sense of you have to be a bit pragmatic as well when you're making decisions.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that, especially in an industry that is kind of known for being unpredictable, right? Such as film.
Great question. So, if I hear you correctly, the question is how do I balance execution and also like creating? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like your vision, I think we all can come into a space and have a vision for something, but then the execution, sometimes it doesn't always align and
Doesn't
it's
always
not always
align. Oh, one
personal
thousand
fault.
percent.
Yeah.
1000%. I think for me, the very first, the gap, the balance comes in identifying where the gap is. So, for example, in Nigeria, specifically in like Hollywood, there are teams of people and crew members who, have been used to a certain type of like storytelling and form of storytelling. It's often rushed. It's often, it leaves little to no preparation time and things like that. Now, one of the things that we do as Fatherland, and I do very, very, I'm just extremely specific and pedantic about this, is knowledge sharing. Because the difference between your vision and the skill set that is available to execute is knowledge. Sometimes you're not dealing with people who are not willing. You're not even dealing with, a lack of desire. You're just dealing with knowledge. They don't know. So what we then end up doing is we end up sort of using which is where the diaspora comes in. You use the diaspora network, right? That you have, and you find the experts that have knowledge that are maybe situated in England or in the US, and you bring them back home to teach, right? And so each project becomes like a mini school, essentially. It becomes a course, where maybe you get an HOD from the UK or the US, and you pair them with like talent from home. And just by them working with somebody who is, an expert in their field globally, they level up. And I've seen this. I mean, literally, this was the story. This has been the story that we've adopted right from Lizard in 2020, and also My Father's Shadow when we shot it last year. It literally is that, like, it's knowledge. I think with some people, you will find that the gap exists in a lack of desire to want to grow. And some people are just inflexible and they're stuck in their ways. But very rarely do you find that. What you find most of the time is that people just don't know how to execute to that level. So it is then my job as producer, especially if I'm really big on producing on the continent, which I am, and I'm big on developing the system to sustain the productions on the continent. It's my job to fill that knowledge gap. It's my job to say, rather than get, a whole team of people to flying from the UK, right? Or from the US, how about I just get one person to flying from those spaces and find the person who is also that person who is open and flexible, and willing to share and willing to teach, and pair them with the best people that are willing, that are hungry, that are ready to learn and to absorb, and pair them with those people and say, okay, work, and sometimes it might mean that there's hiccups here and there, but I would rather a few hiccups and, knowledge is passed on than just expecting an entire system, from the UK or from, because just because it works in the UK or the US does not mean it's going to work on the continent. It's not the same. Does not mean it's going to work in Nigeria. It's not the same, and that's, I think, one of the things that we really were able to do. We were able to adopt certain things to the ecosystem here, and we were also able to adapt certain things to the ecosystem that is globally acceptable in the UK, So it was knowing when to adopt and when to adapt, right? And also knowing how, making sure that across board, that you're also working with the best people from here who are aligned with wanting to create excellence. I truly believe in the power of like unity. When you have a team of people coming together with one goal in mind to give their best. I mean, you will have teams of people who will shoot till they drop dead, literally. And I mean, not to say that it's the best, but like they are willing to go to that extent because they believe in the story and they believe in their craft, and also in some cases because they're also learning and growing, so they want to do amazing works. Yeah, that's what I would say the differences or the gap is. Yeah.
And I know that you mentor young creatives and support African craftsmanship. So can you tell us, what does a truly self-sustaining African creative economy look like to you?
Oh my God, Aisha, this question. Wow. I'll tell you what, I would say that honestly, I'm still figuring it out. But I have a couple of like aspects that I think are really important for us to like lock and nail down. I think talent, we have a plethora of talent. I don't think we're lacking in talent. I think where we lack is systems, right? And I think systems speak to the finance, the legal, the operations, right? I think there's still a disconnection between talent or product, creative products, and finance, legal, operations, distribution. Mix that, like that contains those four things. I think there's still something there that is not quite solidified yet. So I feel like those of us who are sort of looking deeper and deeper, and as we continue to look deeper, we're going to find ourselves situated in either resolving one or two or three or four or all of those things, all of those pillars, because it's the only way that we can actually become self sustaining. It's when, so for example, like our film was financed by the BBC BFI movie and Match Factory. And those are all companies that are situated in the UK. You know what I mean? I think the conversation that should be had, and I'm hoping to have around this film, is how can we make sure that there is African financing in these sort of like, IP and projects. You know what I'm saying? I think because at the end of the day, like it comes down to truly like not just the output of the talent, but it comes down to how that output is able to is owned and is financed and is able to be seen by the rest of the world. You understand? And the systems that it operates on to make sure that it is safe and it is sound and it checks all the global standards. You know what I mean? And that's where operations come in. So truly, I think it's going to be in that mix. It's trying to resolve and solve for one or two or three or all of those things at the same time. So yeah, definitely for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. And for anyone that is watching this film, whether they're abroad or back at home, and they want to do what you're doing, do you have any advice for them? Any nuggets that you can leave us with?
I mean, first of all, I would say come home and live at home. I mean, come for Dirty December, come for Year of the Retired, come home, no problem, come and have fun. But also come and spend 1 month here, come and spend 2 months here. Start with that and live. Situate yourself in the experience. There's something about situating yourself in the experience of what it does is that again you would encounter a lot of constraints and a lot of frustration, so bear that in mind. But when you push past the frustrations, what you see is beauty. You now start to understand the complexity of pain and horror. You start to understand the complexity of beauty and glory. You start to understand this duality that we live in as Africans that sometimes is painful, but it's the truth, and you see beauty in that. You see perspective in that. And as you engage with home more from a lived experience, I would say that you would become more, your outlook to life and to the world will change, and your refinement as well will also change, and then connect with other people that are creating. So if you're in Cannes or any other festival that I'm going to be out, like, come, let's have coffee, let's have drinks, like, you know what I mean, and let's have conversation. I think connecting with people, because we are communal people. That's who we are, and we can't let that be taken away from us under any circumstances. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And before we wrap up, before I let you go, I want to do quick rapid fire questions. You only have
Okay.
2 seconds to think about it. Just give me your answer, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so number one, Lagos or London? I think I already know your answer.
It was
A film that changed your life?
a film that changed my life. Changed my life. Old or new?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Sarafina.
Dream collaboration, dead or alive?
Dream collaboration, dead or alive. God, I don't have one.
No,
I
that's
have a
okay.
lot. I mean, oh my God, it's really hard for me to pick one. But I would say if I had to pick one, I think Kari Fukunaga, he directed Beast of No Nations.
I loved Beast of
Yeah.
No
So
Nation.
I think right now, yeah, I would say that that would be like, yeah, one of my dream collaborations because what he did was brilliant.
Okay, lovely. And last one piece of advice you'd give your younger self just stepping into the world of film. What would you tell her?
Um, Keep going. You can do this. And your choices, you have a gut instinct that cannot be taken away from you. So trust it, definitely. And it's okay to live a little. Yeah.
I love it. Funbi, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you,
your
Aisha.
story.
This is great. Honestly, it's probably my best interview so far.
I
Like,
love it.
the
Thank
questions
you.
are so well thought out. It was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like I said, we're so proud of you. Thank you. Continue making waves. You know, you're not just making films, you're really building a legacy. And we're so honored to be able to speak with you and share this with our audience. I know it will inspire a lot of people. So good luck with everything. We hope we can continue to build a relationship with you, and we can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
Yeah.
Thank you.